My name is Margaret. I'm 64 years old, and I can tell you with absolute certainty, I never saw it coming. One single evening, one simple decision, completely rearranged the way I looked at my life. Nothing in me was prepared for it, yet once it started unfolding, there was no turning back. For most of my years, I had lived in what others might call a comfortable rhythm. I worked steadily, paid my bills on time, and kept a home that was pleasant and tidy. People who visited often told me, "Margaret, you've built yourself such a solid life." And yes, from the outside, it did look that way. Stable, safe, dependable. But what no one ever really saw was that quiet, almost invisible emptiness that lived just beneath the surface. I told myself it was normal, that everyone eventually slips into routine, that contentment is simply learning to accept predictability. And yet, deep down, there was always that faint whisper that maybe I had allowed myself to settle for half a life. That night was warmer than usual for early spring. The house was still, almost too quiet, and I had it entirely to myself. I poured a glass of chilled white wine, thinking I'd curl up with a book I'd been meaning to finish, maybe let the evening slip by unnoticed. But then I heard it. A sound, so soft, so delicate that at first I thought I had imagined it. Almost like a breath carried on air, it drifted from the guest room. That room was practically abandoned, used only when relatives stayed over, and it had been weeks since anyone set foot in there. Something about that faint noise tugged at me, though. I set down my wine glass and walked slowly down the hallway. My hand paused on the doorknob. It was such a small decision, whether to push the door open or walk away. But in that instant, my whole life split into before and after. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. A shift, subtle but undeniable, as though the air itself had changed. The curtains stirred gently in the breeze, carrying the smell of early blossoms through the half-open window. The bedside lamp cast a soft golden glow across the room, highlighting the familiar furniture I'd hardly noticed in years. Everything was exactly as I had left it, yet somehow it felt different. And then I saw it. On the small desk against the far wall sat a neatly placed envelope. Plain, unassuming, but so out of place it made my chest tighten. I reached for it slowly, my fingers brushing the smooth paper. The handwriting was instantly familiar, though oddly distant, like a voice you recognize but can't quite place. The message inside was short. "Margaret, have you ever wondered what it would feel like to truly let go?" I swallowed hard. My heart skipped in my chest. The words burrowed into me, awakening something I had locked away for decades. The letter wasn't signed. No name, no clue. But strangely, I didn't feel fear. What I felt was intrigue, a magnetic pull I couldn't ignore. That night, I barely slept. The question looped in my mind over and over. Who wrote this? Why me? Why now? And why did it feel less like a stranger's hand and more like a message meant directly to me, as though some part of myself had been waiting to be remembered? The following evening, against all reason, I found myself back in that room. The envelope still sat on the desk, but now it seemed heavier, charged with meaning. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding it again, rereading the words as if they might rearrange themselves into answers. It was only a single sentence, yet it felt like an invitation, a doorway into a life I hadn't dared to imagine in years. In the days that followed, subtle changes began to take root. They were small at first, almost unnoticeable, but to me they meant everything. I stopped tying my hair back in the same old bun and let it fall freely, even if only around the house. I wore dresses that hugged me in ways that made me feel alive again, instead of choosing only what was practical. I lit candles at night, vanilla, sandalwood, lavender, allowing the scents to soften the edges of my loneliness while I read in the warm flicker of light. And then 3 nights later, another envelope appeared. "You're starting to remember who you are. Don't stop now." The words froze me in place. A shiver ran through me, but it wasn't fear, it was recognition. Whoever was leaving these notes knew me, knew exactly what I was rediscovering. Yet deep inside, I already understood. These weren't from some stranger watching me from the shadows. They were from a forgotten version of myself, the woman I used to be before responsibility dimmed her spark. The dreamer, the risk-taker, who believed in romance and adventure, who trusted her instincts, who laughed without self-consciousness. Had I written these years ago and hidden them away, waiting for a future me to find them? Or was this something else entirely? A nudge from the universe urging me to wake up before I wasted the rest of my life? I didn't have the answer, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to stop. That night, I stood before my mirror, studying my reflection as if I hadn't truly seen myself in years. I let the silk robe slip slightly from my shoulders, feeling the cool air against my bare skin. For once, I didn't rush to cover up, didn't brush aside my thoughts as foolish. For once, I allowed myself to feel undeniably, unapologetically alive. And the very next morning, I did something shocking, something entirely out of character. I called in sick to work, a thing I hadn't done in years. Instead of burying myself in routine, I drove to a little cafe downtown that I had admired from afar, but never dared to step into. I ordered something rich, indulgent, sweet pastry, strong coffee, and sat by the window, watching the city move around me. People hurried past, living their own lives, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. I felt part of it again. That evening, I turned up the music in my living room and danced, wildly, carelessly, as if I were 20 years younger. My body remembered the movements, the joy, the laughter that had been buried under years of being the responsible one. And as I spun barefoot across the floor, I caught sight of another envelope on the table by the lamp. You see it now, don't you? You were never meant to be just a shadow of yourself. Tears welled in my eyes, not from sorrow, but from pure relief, because at 64, for the first time in so many years, I wasn't just existing anymore. I was finally, truly living. The days that followed felt like stepping into an entirely new chapter of my life, one I hadn't even known I was missing. At 64, I thought reinvention belonged to the young, but I was discovering that it's never too late to rewrite your story. Every morning I woke up with a sense of curiosity I hadn't felt in decades, as if each day was holding out a gift I only needed the courage to unwrap. I started noticing the little things again, the way the sunrise painted the sky in streaks of pink and orange, the sound of neighbors laughing as they walked their dogs, the taste of coffee when I actually slowed down to savor it instead of gulping it before rushing to work. Even my own house seemed transformed, not because the furniture had changed, but because I had. One evening, I returned home to find another note. This one wasn't left in the guest room or on the table. It was taped to my bathroom mirror, so the words stared back at me as I looked at my reflection. I touched the paper with trembling fingers. There was a calm certainty in that message, as if the version of me that I had been chasing wasn't lost at all, just waiting for me to finally look her in the eye. That night, instead of turning on the television like I usually did, I poured myself another glass of wine, lit a candle, and wrote in an old journal I hadn't touched since my 40s. Page after page poured out of me, memories, regrets, dreams I had tucked away. I cried, I laughed, I let the ink run until my hand ached. By the time I set the pen down, I realized something incredible. I wasn't writing to some stranger or even to the universe. I was writing letters to myself, the same way these notes had been arriving to me. A few days later, I did something that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. I booked a train ticket. Nothing extravagant, no faraway country, just a small coastal town I had always told myself I'd visit someday. That someday had stretched into decades, but now I wasn't willing to wait any longer. The train ride itself felt like a revelation. Watching the landscape blur by through the window, I realized how much I'd missed being in motion, moving towards something unknown. I walked along the seaside that afternoon, the salty air tangling my hair, the waves crashing against the shore with a rhythm that seemed to echo my own heartbeat. I hadn't felt that alive since I was a girl. While sitting on a weathered bench overlooking the ocean, I pulled another note from my bag. I didn't remember packing it, yet somehow it was there, folded neatly between the pages of my journal. My breath caught as I read, "You're not running away. You're running back to yourself." I pressed it to my chest and closed my eyes. For the first time in years, I wasn't scared of where life might take me. When I returned home, I began filling my days with new choices. I signed up for a pottery class at the local community center, my hands clumsy at first, but thrilled by the feel of the clay spinning beneath my palms. I joined a book club and surprised myself by actually speaking up during discussions instead of quietly nodding in the background. And I even allowed myself